anarchy experiment. Let me explain. It is my opinion that the broader religious community is an experiment in anarchy. You can find anything, and I literally mean anything, in modern religion and going back many years, covered under the name of following and honoring and serving Christ. It's there. Now, let me say it again. I'm not going to give you a list, but when I say you can find everything being used to supposedly honor and worship Christ, I kid you not. You cannot name a sin that has not been brought in some way or another. And in our current culture in America, given the Constitution, as long as you don't upset the IRS or violate children, they'll let you do anything that you want to call religion. I'm not making that up. That is true. So we're in this place now where exposing error, you're considered to be mean. And it's like this cardinal rule that you can never, ever, ever, ever appear to be mean. Unless you're exposing a mean person, then you can be mean. But that's the double standard of modern ideology. But people don't stop to think that Paul wrote, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them. It is our responsibility to know where error is, to know the strategies of the devil and keep ourselves out of them and our loved ones and those who travel with us. And that's by exposing. That's not the way to go. You don't want to go that way over there. But there is just so much, can I call it confusion? So Jesus warned, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Grapes are not gathered from thorn bushes, nor figs from thistles, are they? So every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot produce good fruit, nor can a bad tree produce good fruit. Now again, you're never ever supposed to look mean. Let me put that in quotation marks. It is a violation of the cardinal rule of our society that if you ever look mean or unkind or unpleasant, you're the devil himself. You're about as wicked and low, as disgusting as it can get. Yet Jesus himself said, I want you to beware of false prophets. And he warned us. He wasn't being mean. And Paul said, expose evil, but he wasn't being mean. But a lot of people, brethren, have drank the Kool-Aid. They have drank this nonsense that religion is supposed to be one big, happy, hugging, back slapping. We're all going to heaven together. Don't matter what you practice. It doesn't matter what you do. Just as long as you say you love Jesus and I say I love him too, we're good to go. We can roll with that. Now, that's not what the Bible teaches at all. But that's kind of where we're at in our society. So our challenge is, there's what are we going to do? There's been this decline in interest in religion in the broad community. I mean, everything that we'd put under the very loose band of Christianity. There have been articles, over the last 2 or 3 years that there's just more and more people leaving churches of all brands, all flavors. They're just like, yeah, we're done with it. And then you get to conservative groups like us, and the decline is even tougher. It's really, there's a lot of people that don't like that full body meat and potatoes, that strong message of the gospel. They want something a little sweeter, a little lighter, more inclusive, because inclusive, that's one of your other current values, to be inclusive. So they push back against the solid book, chapter, and verse thing, and they don't want to hear it. And a lot of times their defense is, well, it's just being mean. It doesn't sound loving to me. Now, love, of course, in the Bible is, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. That's what Jesus said. But still, this inclusive idea and all this stuff going on, it's just getting crazy. There's just so much, I'll just call it soft, whiny, lazy, distracted, pampered people who just, they want a jar of Gerber baby food. And they want to be spoon-fed. I mean, there's no nice way to say it. But they don't want a steak they're going to have to cut up and chew on for a minute. We're seeing that in our community. So our question is, and we'll bring this question up a couple more times, what should Highway 79 South do? What should we, I'm talking about us that consider this our church, what should we do? Should we start easing off a little bit? Well, our numbers are down, and our numbers are down. And people really don't want to hear, some good, strong, hard preaching. They really want a little more fluffy stuff. Let's just serve the dessert. And there's plenty of dessert in the Bible. Let me tell you, we could go on all the, I hate to call them fluffy passages. That almost sounds distracting. But we could go on the more pleasant passages that just talk about love and grace and brotherhood and, God is love and those things. And there's a place for that. And we get plenty of that. Well, what should we do about the meat and potatoes, the hard things, the things that our society doesn't want to hear? We got to make this choice. We can go back a little over 100 years and we can trace the Church of Christ in this community going back further than, of course, I can remember, and we have that whole history laid out, and it goes back to the early 1900s. My question is, let me rephrase that a second. So we go back to the early 1900s. We've managed to have a solid book, chapter, and verse, Bible-thumping, conservative group of people in Pine Bluff for about 115 years. My math may be a tad off, but we've done it that long. Now, in another 100 years, will there still be one? Do we still want to be one? Now, in another 100 years, hopefully we'll just be a name in that little history, that keeps getting added to. And somebody go, oh, yeah, back 60 years ago, there used to be the Highway 79 South Church of Christ. They were a good, solid bunch of people. Or will we be totally forgotten because that conservative, Bible-centered, give me scripture has been forgotten? And Satan has taken everything that's been built upon that last 100 years and being built upon our very lives and effort is gone. So let's talk about something God cannot do. God cannot lie, and there's some other things God can't do. It seems like I did a lesson once and there were like 8 things God can't do. I may dig that out and we'll just have some fun with it. That's one of those lessons that doesn't offend anybody so much. Well, there's another thing that God can't do. He can't let anything unclean, and no one who practices abomination or lying shall ever enter into it. That's the holy city, but only those whose names are written in the book of life. Heaven is a place of purity. And the only people who get into heaven are those who are pure. Those who seek to be holy as God is holy. Those who seek to perfect their holiness. Those who seek to draw near to God. And what modern religion would do is defile heaven. Modern religion would tell you, oh, no, it doesn't matter what sin they are wallowing in. Now, we're not against penitent sinners getting into heaven. That's what heaven is for, penitent sinners. People who really turned away, had to change a heart, and started going the straight and narrow way. That's good. But what modern religion would say is, no. It doesn't matter that they're a drunkard. That's a disease now. So we can't keep the drunkard out of heaven. And and you just start doing all the list of sins, and everybody's got an excuse why they can't give up their sin. And so they still get to go to heaven. They get to be in heaven, this place. But no, God can't let them in. God cannot let impurity into heaven. He can't let any lying or abomination to heaven. If He does, it's no longer heaven. All it is Pine Bluff 2.0. Now, let me tell you, I like my Pine Bluff. I've been here for 30 years. I've really grown to enjoy it, and the people and everything that we have here. I think it's a really neat town. But let me tell you this, without sounding too evil, I do not want to spend eternity in Pine Bluff. Are you with me? When I go to heaven, I don't want it to be Pine Bluff 2.0. It's just everything you had in Pine Bluff, except you're never going to die here. I don't want that. I want it to be a place that is pure, a place that is holy, a place that is what that we've been striving for. So what should Highway 79 South do? Should we water down things some? So let's go along with modern religion? Or should we continue thumping that book, chapter, and verse? Are we willing to thump it so hard and demand it so much that if people say, I can't take that, that's mean. I'm going to XYZ, I'm going to elsewhere. The biggest congregation that exists on planet Earth is elsewhere. Because every member that has ever left here said, I'm going elsewhere. And I'm like, where's that? Well, I don't know, it's elsewhere. And you follow up, elsewhere is usually nowhere, but sometimes it's another place. But elsewhere, are we willing to do that? Are we willing to offend people? Are we willing not to be popular? Are we willing to take a stand and have people look at us and go, boy, they're weird. They're hard to be around. We're not hard to be around if you don't get on that straight and narrow road with us, but you get the idea. These are decisions we have to make, and we have to make them over and over again. We have to back it up. So we're sola scriptura, which is an old Latin term. I kind of like it. It just means Bible only. Actually, it means only Bible, only Scripture. So we have anarchy in the religious community. I'm talking to the broader religious community now. And here's the definition of anarchy. It is a state of disorder due to absence or non-recognition of authority. I highlighted that. There's an absence of authority in what I'm calling the broad religious community. There's a non-recognition of authority. There are people who say, I ain't got to follow that book. I don't have to follow that book if I don't want to. I know what I feel in my heart. I don't need that book. I got the Spirit telling me what to do. on things the Spirit's telling some folks to go do, that is the wrong spirit. I'll guarantee you that. So there is an absence of authority. There's a non-recognition of authority, and that is the issue that we're really up against. Do we really, really, really want to stand with authority? And so we try to anchor down with like Psalms 119, 105. We do a whole lot of these verses, but only do two right now. Your words is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. God said it. That settles it. End of story. Doesn't matter whether I like it or not. I don't change the Bible to fit me. I change me to fit the Bible. That's what a real disciple does. And then we have Proverbs 14:12. There's a way that seems right to a man. Oh, I'm sure this is the right way. Well, I know it's not really what I see in the Bible, but I know this is the right. No, that's the wrong way. If it's not clearly in the Bible, it is not the right way. End of story. Now, we can play games and we can placate and we can do all other kinds of things, but look, no, it doesn't work that way. So how did it all start? How did all this craziness start in America? Now, I have to give you a simplified version. I understand there are different weaves and things and factors that I'm not going to bring in. So this is an oversimplified little outline of how recently in the last, let's say 60 years, maybe 70, things started going really crazy south. Okay? And if you think of some other factors, you're right. I'm not trying to be all-inclusive. So I go back to the 1960s. As most of you know, I was raised Southern Baptist in my formative years. And Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In was the scourge of the earth. It was the worst filth. If you were a decent Southern Baptist, you did not turn on Rowan and Martin's. And if it came on your channel, you changed the channel. Good Christians did not watch that filth. That was the morality that was taught. You didn't go to the theater because the theater was a place of disgust. You did not go to the bowling alley because the bowling alley was a glorified bar. And any decent Christian would never, ever, ever be caught at a school dance. Otherwise, any other dance. And I could have left the Southern Baptist Church, went over to the Assembly of God Church and got the same morality back in the 1960s, or over to the Presbyterian Church, or over to that church that I could have hopped all over town. And basically what I would have got way back then was that while theology varied, there were some moral values that everybody pretty much shared way back in the 60s, right? Church was church. That's what church was. You came to church to have church. It was not entertainment. It was not recreation. It was not high party time, bring your coffee and your donuts. It was none of that stuff. Church was church. You wouldn't have dared try to take your coffee and donuts in a church of any variety in the 1960s. And I'll tell you what, there's still some that you don't dare try to take your coffee and donuts in the church. Even now. And it's not just us. I know we're cranky, but I have friends that preach in other places, and one of them's a Catholic priest, and somebody came into their service with their coffee, sat down on his pew, and he went back and explained to them that they were welcome to keep their coffee in their car, but it did not belong in his service. And they took their coffee back to their car. Now, I know we think of Catholics as liberal sometimes, but let me tell you, there was a time when church was church. It was not a place for entertainment and dancing around and what have you. And preachers did not endorse immorality. They spoke against immorality, and again, pretty much across the board. But in the 1960s, and more like Vietnam era, the winds of change started coming, right? Now, this is one of those places you can quibble. There's a good argument that it began back in World War II. We'll talk about that some other time. But in the 60s, it was really starting to come to a boil, and religious communities started feeling the resistance. They started feeling people push back. Back in the 1960s, that was when Time magazine ran their famous cover, God is Dead, and stuff like that. There was a real pushback. And so what happened was the flesh set its desires against the spirit, and the spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you may not do the things that you please. That's Galatians 5:17. Now, I want you to notice two things. That was going on all the way back in the first century. The flesh set its desire against the spirit. It's a reoccurring thing. Well, in our culture, you give it the 60s, and man, the flesh was really setting its desire against the spirit, and all kinds of things were starting to change. And so what a lot of religious leaders did way back then was they wanted to appease those people who were disgruntled with the old ways. Kind of reminds me of Amos. Ask for the old past where the good way is. But anyway, they wanted to soothe the flesh. Ruffle feathers. Let's put those feathers back down. And they started. And Satan had his opening. That's all it took. The flesh sets its desire against the spirit. And the moment church leadership, elderships, gave that first concession, We need to do some changes here to smooth down these ruffled feathers. Satan had a hook set. Now all he had to do was start reeling it in. Now we're going to follow that progression in my oversimplification. It began with the morally acceptable stuff, things that you would look at and go, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. And it certainly wasn't a gross immorality. I will agree with that. Fellowship halls, which had been almost non-existent to very rough, started growing in popularity. They went from being just simple basements or a spare house somebody had on the property to being multi-million-dollar facilities. Entire basketball courts in some cases, swimming pools. I mean, if you can imagine it, it is out there now in every way. It just boggles your mind. And it all started growing and growing in popularity because what happened was the flesh said, I want mine. The flesh demanded its due. I deserve it. The flesh lusted against the spirit. And the eldership started going, look, we're going to lose members if we don't give a little concession here. Never mind that the Bible said, if anyone's hungry, let him eat at home, so you will not come together for judgment. The remaining matters I will arrange when I come. 1 Corinthians 11:34. You know, preacher, that's really not what that verse means. And so this verse was dismissed as the demands of the flesh started reaching in a little bit. And so if they were willing to dismiss that verse, guess what? They would dismiss another verse too. And then another. And then another. And all they had to do was get the ball rolling. And so he started off in a place that was just barely off track. This is the wisdom of Satan. He is so diabolical genius. He shifted the focus of the church ever so slightly. But that's okay. Because if I want to walk a mile in a straight line, but you can bump me off 0.5 degree from my target a mile away from it, where am I going to end up in a mile? Will I hit my target? I'll be way over there somewhere, won't I? Satan plays the long game. Totally patient. He's got this. He's been around for 6,000 plus years. 60 years is nothing to him. And so he got that bump. That's all it took. It may have just been 0.1 bit of a bump off target. That's okay. Doesn't matter. He has the flesh setting its desire against the spirit. Now he has the flesh trying to commandeer the local congregation. The flesh sets its desire against the spirit. People were no longer happy with just church. They wanted a little bit more. So the goal was no longer those who belong to Christ have crucified the flesh with its passion and desires, because that's what our spiritual training is. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn to crucify the flesh, or as Paul would say in 1 Corinthians 9:27, I discipline my body, I bring it into subjection. That's the goal. That's the Christian practice. But Satan got us bumped off and said, yeah, but we can have a little bit of fun along the way. And then he started building. So eventually the flesh wanted more. So fellowship halls grew into basketball courts, barista bars, pastries, donuts, and they were in the foyer for a time. And then they eventually literally, this one blows my mind. Churches of Christ, I should put that in big quotation marks, thought, we just want to be hospitable. We're just going to offer people as they come into our building some coffee and donuts so they can stand around and have a nice little visit. It's just in a foyer in the, whatever room. We'll put it in a big classroom back there. But, it's just going to stay there. It's okay. Kid you not. Years later, I know this person personally, so I'll take this story firsthand. Had an occasion to be in a service that made him rather uncomfortable, but circumstances being what they were, they accommodated the situation. And an elder sitting in the worship service in the middle of the Lord's Supper, partaking of the Lord's Supper with one hand, would take a bite of his pastry with the other hand. I have another friend that was out traveling. They did not do their planning well, and they found, this is Church Christ, we can go here. And they went in kind of the last minute, and right down the middle of the aisleway as services were beginning was the donut and coffee cart. so that everybody could be comfortable, of course. We want to feel casual. And so eldership started shifting from their original biblical roles and now also taking on the role of providing recreation and entertainment because the flesh wanted more. Now, elders are to be on guard for themselves and the flock, which the Holy Spirit's made them overseers, shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood, because wolves are going to come in. And what happened is they went from keeping the wolves out to regulating the pace at which the wolves could consume the flock they were overseeing. Now, I realize at this point in the lesson, you go, well, preacher, that's a little dramatic, isn't it? It is a little dramatic, isn't it? Because it's that first little bitty step that a lot of people go, I don't see any harm with that. I don't get it. And so, all this stuff starts to take place. Well, the flesh then gets comfortable and gets solid, gets seated in, grows a little bolder. And let's face it, a cappella singing, I love our guys. I love the way we sing. And some nights and some days our singing rocks. It's awesome. It's really good. It's uplifting, inspiring, right? Now, I don't mean this to be too insulting, but some days you don't want to play back a recording of it. Now, I trust as long as your heart's right with God, God's not too worried about that. But if you were just looking at it for an entertaining value, we ain't getting a recording contract. You know what I mean? So, a little piano, a little guitar, a little something. Oh, just a little something more wouldn't hurt, would it? I mean, besides, we've been to this a cappella thing since somewhere in the early 1800s. We got to get up to date. We got to make a change. And Satan banked on biblical ignorance. And boy, did he bank right. We need people in the pews who know their Bible well enough to keep preachers straight. We need people in our membership who know their Bible well enough to keep eldership straight. But a lot of churches ain't got that. They got elderships who want to placate, accommodate, and ruffle, smooth any ruffled feathers. Now, it doesn't matter that the Bible says, let us continually offer up sacrifice of praise to God. That is the fruit of lips that gives thanks in his name. That's what he's looking for. Ephesians 5:19, make melody with your heart. It doesn't matter that the Bible said all of those things. After all, that's not really what the Bible meant. And if eat at home really didn't mean eat at home anyway, preacher, then a little another change, you allowed that change. What's wrong with this change? And that's the way the game's played. If you will do A, then you might as well do B. Well, if you'll do an A and B, well, you might as well do C. And it keeps on moving down the alphabet until it ends up places you didn't think it would ever end up, but that's how Satan plays the game. So the flesh grew bolder still. Old preachers like me, come on. We ain't entertaining. We're boring. We're like abrasive. We're up here beating the book, talking the gospel, giving the training message. You got to get your act together. You got to pull it together. God ain't your grandpa who's going to pat your head and say, "Oh, I know you gave it your best effort. Come on in, honey." He said, "Carry your cross, walk in the footsteps, love him more than Father." And we teach that message to people. Oh, I don't like that. Them old men are not pleasant. I can't listen to that old man. Mm-hmm. Ain't the message I want to be hearing. Let's get some women preachers in here. Women just have a nurturing energy. They have a different vitality. We get to grandmas up because the grandma's got grandma love. And then we get to mamas up because mama got eternal patience like old guys like me don't have. And they are bubbly and enthusiastic. And I have seen a couple online. And I'm like, hey, they're good speakers. They really are. They were engaging. And Paul said, I didn't know that I wanted to teach or exercise authority over man to be very quiet. Well, preacher, look, if you're not going to worry about 1 Corinthians 11:34, that really doesn't mean that. And you're really not going to worry about Ephesians 5:19, that really doesn't make melody with your heart. Why are you going to worry about this verse 2? None of those really mean what you think they mean. So let's just go ahead and let women have the pulpit, because we've already dismissed other verses and dismissing one more. This won't be that hard, will it? And Satan sets the stage for more. He ain't quitting. He's not going, okay, I got the fellowship hall in. Whew, I'm done. I'm going to go take a break. Oh, I got the instrumental music in. I'm done. No, he's not quitting yet. He set the desire of the flesh against the spirit. The flesh said, I want a place to have a party. The flesh said, I'm getting bored with a cappella. Our timing's not right. We're not always on pitch. I think we need guitar, piano, organ. The flesh said, old preachers like Clarence, They're stodgy, boring, they're rough. I don't even want to sit in the auditorium and listen to them. Give me a woman preacher. You see what Satan did? Once he got leadership to allow flesh to cause one shot, he had his end. The old timers said, give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Remember that one? Old timers, you say, you open the gate a little bit, watch out, here comes the flood. Yeah, but come on, immorality. No. Immorality would never. Yeah, oh, wait a minute. We call it, in preacher speak, sanctioned adultery. In the 1970s, divorce rates began to rise more and more and more. They kept rising until they hit about 50%. Now they've leveled out around 50%, and year by year they bounce around from 48 to about 52%. And so churches started feeling the pressure. We got a lot of folks here, and married, divorced, remarried, multiple situations. What are we going to do about it? People are getting their feathers ruffled because, every time we preach the Bible truth on it, a lot of people are feeling kind of convicted. They don't like it. And so they started looking for ways to make it okay. Now, it didn't mind that Jesus said, verbatim Bible, whoever divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she herself divorces her husband and marries another man, she is committing adultery. But, hey, we already dismissed the eat at home verse. We already dismissed the make melody your heart verse. We already dismissed I don't allow one to teach or have authority over man. We already dismissed that. Surely this verse really doesn't mean what it's. This is just too unreasonable. This just isn't practical in our culture or any culture. Obviously that's not what it means. And now we actually have sanctioned adultery. And many of our own congregations. I'm not just talking about some crazy church out there. I'm talking about churches of Christ. But it wouldn't go any further, would it? Oh, yeah. Satan's not done yet. I think Satan's kind of playing a game. I think Satan's like, okay, I see they're on the straight and narrow. Let me see if I can bump them off a little bit. He goes, oh, I did it. Let me see if I can bump them off a little more. And he did it. And he says, oh, wait a minute. I bet I can bump them off a little more. I bet I can get it. And I think he's just trying to play it. How far can I get them to go while they still claim they're following Jesus, worshiping Jesus, doing what Jesus taught? How far off of Jesus' teaching can I get them? And they still think they're doing what Jesus wants. Well, obviously pretty far. So he pushed us further and further and further. And now in the broader community, this is a common issue. I'm not talking about penitent homosexuals. I'm all in favor of a penitent anybody. Anybody who says, I was in sin, I'm coming out, I'm good with you. I'm talking about practicing, living in it. And yet we're going to call that person who we know is living with her lesbian lover or he's living with his gay boyfriend, living that lifestyle. We say, yeah, they're such good members. No, they're members in good standing. But we really needed a new preacher, and the only one we could get was this. Yeah. Could never happen, could it? Doesn't matter that the Bible says, do you not know the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, or effeminate, or homosexuals, or thieves, or covetous, or drunkards, or revilers, or swindlers will inherit the kingdom of God. It's not happening. Now, we could pretend it, but it's rather amazing that Satan has pulled people so far off. Now, I have yet to know of what you and I would have at one time called a sound congregation that is now advocating homosexuality. I don't know of one. I know of people who in the past have been members of the Church of Christ who told me themselves, I'm not really sure about that issue anymore. I'm not sure it's wrong. And I know in the broader range of the use Church of Christ, there are people that use that name that are pro-homosexual. Now you have to understand though, the use of the name Church of Christ, anybody can use it. My joke used to be, if you want to go open up a bar and call it Church of Christ, you can do it. That way you can call your wife up and say, honey, I'm down to Church of Christ. Be home about 10 o'clock, right? So just because it says Church of Christ doesn't mean it's us. But there are people out there using that name who are pro-homosexual. And of course, you know the rest of the story in the broader religious community. Most lately, it was the Methodist Church. So the drifting continues. And it will continue. That's just the way it goes. Satan is making his inroads. Little more, little more, little more. And he wants to make his inroads into Highway 79 South. That's what he wants to do. Because we're pretty resistant. We've been resistant for well over 100 years following our history back. But he sure would like to get us to bump off and see how far he could get us in another 50, 60 years. And did you think about that? Back in the 60s, I kid you not, you wouldn't have had the discussion about homosexuality and whether it was right or wrong and can an active gay go to heaven. It was just, no, end of story. Only 60 years later, actually it was less than 60 years, you had various religious groups standing up endorsing the homosexual lifestyle. So if Satan can get Highway 79 to bump off track a little bit, how long do you think it would take? Do you think it'd take 60 years? How about just 40? Because once we start chasing an imitation of the world out there, he's got us. So should we seek the approval of men? Or do you want that original Christianity, which is abrasive to the flesh? I know it is. But the flesh sets its desire against my spirit. My flesh isn't trying to get my spirit to heaven. And so we got to do as Paul did. We have to learn to discipline our bodies, make them our slave, bring them into subjection, lest when we have gone about teaching others, we find ourselves disqualified. So our title is Thy Heart Right with God? I want you to look deep. I want you to look strong. Just because we say the right words that roll out of our mouth and we say some nice religious platitudes, that does not mean our heart is right with God. And that does not mean the battle with the flesh is over. It's the battle. And it's in here. It's in here in me, and it's inside you. Hold the course, brother. Hold it hard. Satan hadn't given up the fight. He's not going to give it up till he gets you in hell with him. If you've wandered off the straight and narrow and you feel you need to make a change, we're here to help. If you haven't been baptized into Christ, our baptistry is ready. All together, we stand and sing.